Welcome to another episode of the Looking After Nature podcast, where we hope to bring you close to nature and wildlife in Hampshire. My name is Andy Davidson. I'm here once again with my co-host, Carly Harrod.
Hi Andy. So today we're at Queen Elizabeth Country Park and it is absolutely beautiful here today. The beech trees have got an amazing show of colours on at the moment.
Yeah, it's a lovely fresh crisp day and it's nice to get out somewhere like this, isn't it?
It is, and we're here today not just once again to enjoy the fantastic views that our countryside has, but also to meet James, who works with our tree team.
Hi James, great to see you today.
Good to see you too, Andy.
And such a lovely day as well. I mean, it's absolutely breathless, no wind, but
It is a little nippy, but the sun is shining and we're out in QE Forest.
it's nice and fresh because there was a good frost this morning. So yes, but it's a lovely day to be out and about.
It is indeed, yeah.
So we're at Queen Elizabeth Country Park. I mean, maybe a bit of your story. I mean, you were the senior ranger here for a little while, weren't you?
That's right, yeah. I was senior ranger here for 2 years, and that covered the whole of QE Forest and the whole of Butser Hill. So a good mix of forestry and chalk grasslands there. So, and then from there, I've now moved on to the Trees and Woodland team with Steve Peach, and we're now covering the whole of the County Council, Hampshire County Council, covering the ash dieback issues and the tree safety across all the county parks. So,
As well as some of the tree planting.
tree planting is involved in that as well, and then that all ties in with climate change and all our other projects we've got going on.
Yeah. But QE is the Queen Elizabeth Country Park, or QE as we tend to call it.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a strange park because actually you've got the A3 that goes right through the middle, and Hampshire County Council itself owns the ground on the other side, which is Butts Hill National Nature Reserve.
That's right. Yeah.
Which is mainly open chalk grassland.
Yes.
And then you've got all this on this side of the road, which is mainly woodland. But
That's
this
right.
is owned by the Forest Commission, isn't it?
That's right. This is owned by the Forest Commission, and I believe I can't remember the exact date, but it was all once downland, which the Forest Commission bought sometime in the past and planted up with millions of trees, and we're standing in it now, and we have predominantly beech, which I believe the forester that planted it all looked at the Chilterns and said, well, it grows well there. It should grow well here. So yes, most of the forest here is beech.
Yeah.
But we do have a few compartments of western red cedar, some spruce, and some hemlock as well.
Because Forestry Commission relates to forestry. It's a bit of a strange word, forestry, because the actual original word for forest was about hunting reserve. And you know,
Right.
most people think it means trees.
Yes.
But the forests in old days were the royal hunting preserves.
Yes.
And quite often they had no trees at all in them.
Right.
But
Yes.
now it's turned to the fact that forestry definitely means trees, doesn't it?
It does indeed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because this is a commercial forestry. It's not one of the native woodlands as we think about it sometimes, is it?
No, that's right. It was all planted for the commercial sector. The beech, I mean, when it was planted, would have gone into things such as the furniture making. They did a lot of. I know beech was actually planted. They did a lot of clogs out of it and things like that back in the day. So it was all planted for that reason. The conifer, so the red cedar and the spruce, more planted for the construction industry, cladding, planking, beams, the joists that go in your house that hold your floors up, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So I mean, we're just standing between two different blocks here, obviously. We've got beech over there.
Yeah.
And quite often people are noticing the difference between that sort of beech woodland and the sort of beech woodland you might get in the New Forest, which is native and naturally grown.
Yes.
This is, as you say, been planted, and it tends to be quite dense, doesn't it? A lot denser than proper native woodland.
It does, yes. I mean, if you get in the woodland, you might be able to see that the trees are all in rows, and that's for harvesting purposes. So the machines can go down and cut out what they want and get in between the trees quite easily. So you can sometimes pick up those lines. They're also then grown quite close together to make the trees draw up, so that you're getting as much height and as much timber out of them as possible.
So, and also you've got a nice straight trunk as
Exactly.
well.
Yeah.
Because I mean, in terms of biodiversity in a native woodland where where the tree will grow naturally. It spreads out a bit more and you get a lot more nooks and crannies in it and funny little branches, which is what you want for biodiversity.
Yes, yeah.
But as you say, it's grown tight and close to get it nice straight trunks, which are easily harvestable.
That's right, yes.
Although, I have to say, there is value in biodiversity, because this is a native plant, as beech. And it'll have a lot of species which feed on it and feed on the seeds.
Indeed.
So there is value in the wild biodiversity in plantations as well, isn't there?
Oh, of course, yeah. There's always value in biodiversity in commercial woodlands. Ideally, what we do have here is a bit of a monoculture. So we just have the one species pretty much across the whole site, or the large compartment, which isn't fantastic for wildlife, because if you've only got kind of a certain amount of species that will feed on those trees and use them. So if you could, mix it up a bit. Some foresters have done. They'll do 3 rows of beech and then a couple of rows of something else, maybe some oak or something, and then and mix it up. Certainly, nowadays we're moving more to that side. A lot more diversity with climate change coming on. Lots of pests and diseases coming through. The more diversity and the more different species of trees we can have within a forest, it helps to mitigate against those problems with climate change.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Because if you've got, as you say, a monoculture, just like, you might have a monoculture of one type of grass in the field.
Yes, yeah.
You've got a bit of a monoculture in one type of tree here.
Yeah.
And the trouble is, if that one tree gets an issue,
then you've lost your whole stock.
Yeah, you've lost your whole stock. And as you say, you've got a diversity of things in there as well with other species. You might have more of those natural predators of, like, some of the little wasps.
That's right.
Which might, there might be a species. I mean, there are some problems with species, some of the moths, aren't there? Was the oak processionary moth?
The oak processionary moth, which is affecting a lot of oak around the southeast. Definitely, it's coming on. That's our next challenge. That's for sure.
Yeah, some of the with monocultures and non-native stuff, because the oak processionary moth, is it a non-native species?
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah. And sometimes there aren't natural predators for those species either, are there?
No, exactly. So unfortunately, the only way, or one of the only ways to deal with the oak processionary moth is to spray with chemicals to kill it, but unfortunately it kills everything else as well. So
that's one of the big issues, isn't it? And that's probably why, because looking at these trees, how old are these trees, do you think?
They are about 60 to 80 years old.
So I think from what I know of the site, I think it was planted up in the 1950s after the Second World War.
It was about that time, yeah.
Because, there's an upper part of this called War Down, which suggests it was all open downland.
Yes, yeah.
And we probably wouldn't be planting on open downland these days, would we?
We certainly wouldn't.
So things have certainly changed. So the style of planting's changed, as you say, and what the mix you have in there as well.
Mm. And certainly after the war, a lot of sites were planted up with pines for pit props, and the thought was that if there was another war, we're going to need the timber, because a lot of wood was used within the wars. So, but then obviously we didn't have another war, so we have a lot of plantations, certainly down in the south, a lot of pine that have just been left, and they were planted on ancient woodland sites. Yeah. And so now there is a process of pause restoration. So plantations on ancient woodland. That's it. And so there's a process of slowly taking out the pines and other species to bring back the ancient woodlands. Yeah.
Because that's the funny thing, actually, because we're talking about quite a lot of the planting here was on downland.
Mm.
You mentioned PAWS, which is an acronym for Plantation on Ancient Woodland Sites. Yeah. And you can have an ancient woodland site, but with not many ancient trees on, can't you?
That's right, yes.
And it's all about the ground flora and all the plants in the wood, which you maintain. So you could look, it'd be quite odd sometimes, you could look at an ancient woodland site and think, well, the trees aren't that old.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But it's the value. On the poor sites is the fact that there's still the value in the ancient woodland underneath. So slowly replacing that back with native plants and trees.
Yes, and opening up the gaps, letting the seed source that is already in the ground to come through, and those native species to come through.
Mm. So turning around, we were talking about some of the conifer species. There's a totally different trees on this side, isn't there?
Indeed. So we've got western red cedar, some spruce a bit further up, and some western hemlock. All species that don't grow naturally in this country. Yeah. They are predominantly used for construction industry and fencing materials.
Yeah.
So Western red cedar is very, very good tree. Very good at rot resistance, so very good for cladding, that sort of thing, fencing. Spruce, very good in terms of its structural integrity, so it can hold weight. So it's used a lot for the joists, as we said, for the construction industry, the trusses in your roof. So hemlock, less so. It seems to split out, so that kind of if you do two longer lengths, it splits. So that's usually used for things like sleepers. So
railway sleepers.
Not railway sleepers these days. More gardening, garden sleepers and stuff like that. So
I suppose the railway sleeper industry is probably more concrete these days, but people are using it in their new gardens, aren't they?
Gardens, yes, yeah.
So where do these conifer species come from?
Spruce is mainly comes from the Baltics, so up Norway, Sweden, that kind of way, the Baltic forests up there. Western red cedar, I believe, North America, that sort of way, and hemlock is a North American species as well.
Because that's one of the issues as well in terms of biodiversity, in the fact that, let's say, spruce is a European species, but not native to Britain.
Yes.
And sometimes things like some of the crossbill phlox, which is the type of finch which feeds on the cones of these, they quite like the spruce cones.
Yes.
So there is some ability for some of the sort of native species you do get in this country to use those species. But certainly the American species, they won't have so many of the moths and things like that feeding on the leaves, will they?
No, not so much. No.
Yeah.
So they're not as good for biodiversity in those terms, I suppose.
But it is a commercial crop. That's the one thing to think about. And actually, the other thing is it's a renewable commercial crop, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah. So these trees will grow, and they'll be on a rotation of around 40 years, maybe 50 years, and they'll be slowly thinned out over those 40, 50 years. And every year, the trees will be putting on a certain amount of incremental growth. So you can take out a certain amount of trees, and actually you've still got the same amount of volume within the wood. So you may be taking the trees out, but the trees that you've left have put on that same amount of wood. Yeah. So it's a renewable source. And at the end, when you've got down to your last few very, very large trees, you've hopefully, if you've managed it well, you've already got your younger trees coming up in the gaps, and that's a well-managed commercial woodland.
Because I mean, you don't do so much clear felling and clear an entire block these days, which would have been common practice, wouldn't it?
It would have been common practice, and certainly in Scotland and Wales, they still do clear very large areas. And the problem with that is it just wipes a whole, landscape clear of trees, and the connectivity between the remaining woodlands is completely lost for wildlife. So there's definitely a new trend now to make those clear fells smaller, make them irregular shapes, and certainly get the structure of the woodland, so we've got young plants coming up in between, and so that so the wildlife can continue to flow through the woodland. So
because there will be wildlife in here. I mean, it's not a totally dead zone.
Oh no,
it's not as rich maybe as some of the native definitely not as rich as some of the native woodlands in terms of species of insects and plants and animals in there. But it still has quite a bit of value.
Oh, certainly. Yes.
And actually, with these days, we're in a climate change emergency, and it's a lot of people think trees are definitely part of the solution to that.
Yes,
but, I mean, there's going to become an issue with you suddenly what are you cutting down trees for? But one of the things to think about, because the trees are they photosynthesize like other plants. So what they're doing is they're taking in carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and they break it up basically. Photosynthesis. So they release oxygen. So they put the carbon into the structure of the tree itself. So that becomes part of the living part of the tree.
That's right. Yeah. The living part of the tree, and then as new layers of the tree grows, it then gets locked up into the center of the tree, which is the heartwood. And so yes, it's locking that carbon up in the tree. Now, when the tree obviously falls down, if it was to fall down naturally and then rot back into into the ground, that carbon's released back into the atmosphere. By cutting the tree and turning it into a product, maybe a housing product, you're then locking that carbon up for a longer period of time. So it's locked away and not gone back into the atmosphere.
And that's what we mean by the term sequestration, because
that's right.
It comes from a Greek word. I'm right to say it's a Greek word, in hiding it away.
Right.
So, that's quite a nice little term. So basically you lock it in. I mean, certain measure goes into the soil through the trees, roots and things like that as well. But I like that hiding it away and locking it away. Yeah. Because I can go and sequester myself in a nice little cottage at the west coast of Scotland.
Yes.
It's the same meaning, really. But yeah, there is the thing. But also, people don't realise sometimes that trees breathe and respire like us as well. So when it's dark, they're breathing out carbon dioxide, aren't they?
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
So I mean, if you cut a tree down, because the conifers don't regrow from the stump, do they?
No, there's only one that I believe does, which is the coastal redwood from North America, Oregon, that kind of Washington state, and that will coppice, what we call coppice. So if you cut it down, it will then regrow from that stump. And it's the same tree, it's the same root system, but it's just growing new branches. So, but most of them won't regrow.
But most of the broadleaf trees, like we're talking about the beech here, will regrow from the stump.
That's right. Yes. So you can, like I say, coppice and regrow.
So with the conifers, you tend to replant.
That's right. Yes.
Right. Because do they produce viable seeds that can grow for seedlings?
They do, yeah. So in a well-managed woodland, you would slowly thin out and create gaps within, and the seeds will fall down. And certain species do better than others, depending on their shade tolerance. Something like the western hemlock is very shade tolerant, and so grows up underneath its own canopy. Right. So if you go into a compartment of hemlock, you'll see lots of little seedlings underneath. Something like spruce is less shade tolerant, so it's you won't see so many seedlings unless there's a gap in the canopy and there's actually light going down to the floor.
So there will be a period when this is cut down where this is a habitat, will be emitting carbon, but then as it regrows again, it then starts sequestering and taking in carbon dioxide, doesn't it?
Indeed, yeah. And the best way to do it is to get it managed, so you're doing it both at the same time. It's slowly taking trees out and they're growing at the same time. And
that's the thing about it being renewable. It's a renewable building material.
That's right.
There's all sorts of uses, which hopefully we'll talk about in a minute, in terms of the timber and woodland, but it's not a fossil fuel.
No.
Like coal or gas or oil or even peat in terms of producing energy.
Yeah.
Because it does renew itself naturally.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. And as you say, I mean, even when, because beeches can be quite a good building material for furniture, can't it?
It can, yeah. And certainly years gone past, it was one of the favoured trees for furniture. And to this day, along with ash and other broadleaves, it's still used for a lot of things.
So if you've got any beech or oak or other hardwood furniture in your house, that is a carbon store. That's locking away carbon.
It is, yeah. And so the longer you can keep that chair, that table, the longer that carbon will be locked up.
Yeah. So we talked about how different sort of some of the conifers and the broadleaves and plantations are different. So actually looking down there, it's quite beautiful in the sun at the moment, isn't it?
It's lovely, yeah. Different colours certainly coming through in autumn. It's gorgeous.
So it's looking down at some beach at the end of the ride here, and actually across on the hill. Is that War Down up there?
That's the edge of War Down. And at the moment you can see just an orange-brown colour coming through the canopy from the bright greeny yellow that it was in the summer.
So beech is a broadleaf tree, as we call it, because it's most people think of it as a leaf flat.
Yeah. Yes.
And they, of course, they're deciduous, means that the leaves fall off in the winter. So this is the autumn change before the leaves fall off, isn't it?
That's right. Yes.
But most conifers, they have like needle-shaped leaves, don't they?
They do, yes. And they don't lose their leaves during the winter.
There are a couple. It's larch.
There's a few. There's larch, and there are some of the redwoods. So the dawn redwood loses its leaves as well.
All right. Okay. Yeah, because the thing is that what these trees, all of these trees have got is a massive surface area of leaf, haven't they, compared to grass, of course.
Yes.
And we've got the A3, I don't know if you might be able to hear it, but well, we certainly can. We've got the A3 just down below us, cutting through. And that will be reducing a certain amount of pollution, particulates in particular.
Yeah.
And certain size particulates are really damaging to people's lungs.
Mm.
So having this sort of woodland right next to a source of pollution, a lot of those particles come up into the atmosphere and they get trapped on the leaves of the trees.
Indeed, yeah.
And sometimes conifers can be far better because they're slightly sticky, aren't they?
That's right, yeah.
So these can filter out some of those pollutants from the atmosphere.
Mm.
It's clearly very valuable, if there's a population nearby. So you've got Petersfield just north of here.
Yep, Petersfield's just 4 miles up the road.
So it does quite a good value in terms of, filtering a lot of pollutants out of the air before it reaches people who are living in Petersfield.
Yes.
So woodlands, it's got many, many values.
Mm.
So we're staying on a ride. So what do we mean by a ride? What's this track for?
A ride, initially, basically, is the infrastructure within the woodland. So it's a pathway generally made by foresters to be able to get the timber out of the woodlands, out so it can be, processed and sent off to the mill. So here we're on a hard track ride. It's gravel, stone, and that's so we can get lorries up into the woodlands to uplift the timber and take it back out. But the edges of the ride are very important. We do want kind of an eco layers. So we've got the high canopy of the trees, and then ideally have a shrub layer, and then a grass layer, and then the ride itself. And sometimes the rides will be just grass, and you'll find things like snakes and adders out drying in the sun. And there's lots of food source in the size of these rides. For invertebrates and then birds and mammals.
Because I think traditionally, because we've talked about traditional as opposed to more commercial forestry practice, so the ride would just be the route of getting in and out.
That's right, yeah.
But I think they've realised the importance of getting some light into these side bits. So I can see we've got plants like hemp, agrimony. There's going to be thistles. There's dogwood there, which is a bush that produces little white flowers. Right, yes. There's an elder there. And then you've got pieces like hazel and oak, I think I've seen through here.
That's right, some willow.
Yeah. Now, a lot of those are flowering plants.
Indeed, yeah.
Which encourages the pollinators into these things, but also encourages some of those pollinators are wasps and other insects which will eat the caterpillars that are on the trees.
That's right, yes.
So they're natural predators of some of the problems in the forestry, aren't they?
Indeed. Yeah.
And of course, being sheltered in amongst the woodland, this can be quite a lot warmer than an exposed site. So that again promotes the pollination in the summer as well, doesn't it?
Yes.
So, I mean, there's certainly a bit more value to this ride than just an access route, isn't there?
That's right, yeah. It's extremely valuable in terms of wildlife. I believe.
So when you come to harvest this, it's not guys with axes and saws these days, doesn't tend to be, does it?
It doesn't, no. Since the invention of the chainsaw, it's all become mechanical now. And also, after the chainsaw, we have the timber harvester. So big machines that can cut down the tree, measure it and process it into the logs that needs to be done all in one go. So instead of a team of 20 men going through the forest, it's now just one man cutting the trees, processing them, another man picking them up and putting them on the lorry.
But you'll find stacks of timber up the sides of the rides as well, won't you?
You will, yes. So the idea is the harvester will go through the woodland, processing all the wood, cutting the trees down, processing it into logs. A machine then called a forwarder will go through behind, pick up those logs and stack them on the side of the rides. And then after that, the timber lorries will come in and collect those logs and take them off to the sawmills.
And some of the old days of how they process timber, saw pits and sawyers, a sawyer was a guy who operated a saw, wasn't it?
That's right.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
That's some of the old country names. It's a bit like Carter, isn't it? You know, you drove the cart around the farm.
That's right.
Sawyer is an old name for a woodland worker, isn't it?
Yes. So sometimes in old commercial forests, you will see you might find some flat areas where there were charcoal pits or charcoal kilns. Old, like I said, saw pits, so dug out long kind of rectangle shaped pits.
Yeah.
And that's actually where the name Top Dog comes from. So
yeah.
You were the top dog, you were the man who stood on top of the pit, and the underdog would be the one down in the pit getting all the sawdust on his head.
Yeah, because basically you lay the trunk of the tree across the pit.
That's right.
And then you've got a big long saw with 2 handles.
That's it.
And there's somebody down below getting all the sawdust on them and, you know, the horrible conditions. There's the top dog, as you say, is the guy on top.
Yeah.
Probably a bit more senior. You know, you get the apprentice down there, don't you?
Indeed.
Yeah. And a lot of these would have been used since Roman, well, even before that probably as well, because I mean, we're just on the edge of the Weald here.
Mm.
And it's quite a wooded landscape, isn't it, the Weald?
It is, yes, full of nutrients.
Yeah. But it's got far more woodland than most of Britain, in fact. It's a huge percentage of woodland.
Yes, yeah.
And as you go along down, because I'm originally from Sussex, which is over the border, as you go down through there, you find furnace ponds and all sorts of names like that, reflecting, because there's ironstone in the ground.
That's right.
And there's wood for charcoal, which you'd use to smelt the iron.
That's right. They used to use a lot of so if you go to West and East Sussex, you'll find a lot of hornbeam planted, which was coppiced. So it regrows every time, and that's planted very near where that ore is found.
Yeah.
And so they used the hornbeam to make charcoal to then smelt down the ore. So it's a big industrial landscape, really.
Well, this is it, and people forget, I think, that this is, you know, a semi-industrial landscape in some ways. I mean, you've moved those sawing activities away to, you know, to timber yards and things like that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be saw pits in the woods here.
No. Yeah.
But it's a commercial living landscape that, you know, will occasionally, you know, look bad because it's partly been cut down.
Yes.
But it's those resources we need out of these timber, isn't it, which is really useful.
It is, and you know, every single person in the UK, if you can imagine a log, a piece of log, maybe 12 inches long and say 6 inches wide. That's about the amount of timber or wood that every single person in the UK uses every day.
Yeah.
Whether that's through paper, you know, for your work, loo roll. The energy that comes to your house, a lot of our energy providers now are green, so they're big biomass burners. We use obviously firewood. So there's lots of uses for wood, and sometimes people don't realise it. The packaging that all our food comes in, cardboard, it's all wood fibre.
And although it does involve cutting down trees, which is, you know, quite a big issue these days, it's that renewable, and it's far better than plastic, isn't it?
It is indeed, yes, yeah. We're putting a lot less carbon into the atmosphere by using trees and the renewable source of trees rather than creating plastics and chemicals.
Yeah. And you do find people planting, you know, on their own grounds, you know, where they're trying to live sustainably. They plant willow, which is what they burn in their wood burners to heat their homes, isn't it?
That's right, indeed. Yeah.
And actually the centre here, I'm pretty sure it's heated by wood chips, isn't it?
It is. It has its own biomass boiler. So it about 80% of the time, it's completely, the whole centre is run on biomass chip. So, and that is just wood chip that has been that has come from. So it's not the whole trees. It's generally the waste product of the tree. So when the tree's harvested, all the branches are knocked off. The main stem timber is sent off and processed into products as housing and as such like. And the smaller branches are then chipped up into small pieces, and that's the stuff that's going into the blades. Yeah.
So all those bits like the bark being cut off and stuff like that, you know, that goes to be chipped.
Yes.
I mean, some of they call it arisings when they take branches off the tree.
Right, yes.
You know, they might well be left in some places to rot down naturally inside the woods as well, wouldn't it?
Yes. So there's good practice is that you'll leave a certain amount of the arisings in the woodland. So reintroducing those nutrients back into the forest floor.
Yeah. So we talked about the different products out of these woods. I mean, some of the, you go back a few centuries. There's a route that goes just from north of here all the way down to Portsmouth, which is now called the Shipwright's Way, and that relates to the old practice of using particularly oak in building the ships that built our navy, basically.
That's right, indeed.
And the whole thing about one of the songs talks about heart of oak.
Yes.
And that's what the ships were, weren't they? And some of those oaks were specially grown to form certain parts of the ship as well, weren't they?
That's right. So like you say, our navy was built from English oak, and the foresters would go out with certain templates and look for certain shapes. So the bows in the ship, they would try and find them within the tree, and they'd also then prune the trees and encourage them to grow into those certain shapes. So yes, they'd have these big templates and go out and try and find the right shapes for the boats.
And some of those masts were certain. I mean, I think spruce was a big thing in terms of using masts, weren't they? Because there's different wood for different products.
That's right. So spruce was used for masts, European larch, and so I've sold for the clippers, the old clipper boats that are still around today, and they mostly do kind of leisure tours. We've cut down European larch for the masts for those, and they have to be extremely straight and not free and extremely strong to withstand the forces that they have out at sea.
And that's also the thing with wood as a building material, is the fact that it's flexible as well as strong, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's got extreme tensile strength as well as compression strength.
Yeah.
So lots of different species are better. We spoke about spruce earlier being used for its tensile strength in construction.
Yeah.
The best tree or conifer tree for construction is the Douglas fir.
Yeah.
So even though it's not native to this country, we do grow it quite a lot because it is the strongest in terms of beams for housing. It is the strongest timber we have. So alongside oak, but it grows faster than oak. So.
But also, I mean, cedar. I mean, you hear of cedar cladding as well, and cedar shingles.
That's right. Yes. So cladding would be the stuff that goes on the outside of your house to keep the rain out. So Western red cedar is extremely rot resistant.
Yeah.
So it's milled into cladding. Shingles for roofs.
Yeah.
So instead of your tiles, you have small wooden tiles or shingles instead. And they're extremely resistant to rot, so they last a very long time.
And also, they don't need chemical treatment to have that rot resistance, do they? Don't need varnishing or anything like that, do they?
No. So the natural tannins within the wood protect the wood. So other trees like pine that doesn't have those tannins, we would add a chemical to help it, not rot down so quickly. Whereas trees like Western red cedar, the coastal redwood, those kind of species, they have that natural tannin. And oak as well has got sweet chestnut, another one, with these natural tannins that just protect the wood once it's cut.
And that makes it, gives it additional benefits of being very green. And you're not using things that are sourced from petrol products or artificial chemicals.
No.
It's a renewable resource that will grow, given the chance.
Yes.
But also it's got that inbuilt resistance to rot and things like that.
Yeah, to withstand rot and all sorts. Yeah.
So in terms of somebody's house, you could have clearly shingles and cedar cladding on the outside. You have different types of timber in the roof joists or in the beams supporting the floors.
You could indeed, yes. So you might have spruce holding your roof up, oak beams holding your if it were more of an expensive house maybe, but holding up your the actual weight of the house, floorboards. You might have your another species for your skirting and your architraves, your doors.
Because I more often worked on heathlands. I mean, one of the trees that we tend to clear to restore the biodiversity of sites is birch from that. It's almost seen as a weed species by some foresters, isn't it?
It is. Birch grows so freely. It's a pioneer species. So any space that is cleared, the seeds will grow up in those spaces. So certainly where areas are cleared, if the seed source is there, birch will come back, and on heathland that's usually the case. But it's also free, so a lot of foresters are seeing that, why are we paying them planting trees when it's already there in the ground? And so if you let this free source of seeds come up and thin it out nicely, you can then have a good stand of trees.
Because it is a lot shorter lived than an oak tree can last, several hundred years, but a birch, is probably oldest 150, 200 years at most.
Generally, an old birch will be something between 80 to 120 years, maybe. And they become very ecologically important at that age, because the bugs get in and holes, and they're very important trees. Along with oak, but oak, like you say, will be centuries old. A typical rotation for oak for a forester will be 120 years.
Yeah.
So if you ever plant an oak, you'll never be the one cutting it down.
Yeah.
It'll be your grandchildren or their grandchildren.
So quite often when we were clearing it off of heathlands, there was, sometimes you just burn it on site because you need to get rid of it, but also there is increasingly it's more uses for it, because I think we were selling it as people were making broom heads out of it, holds of bristles.
That's right, yes, yeah. Broom heads out of it. It's also used for the horse riding jumps. So when you see the races, you've got those big jumps set up. They're all birch, and now we're also baling it up, so using it a bit like a biofuel, so baling it up and burning it as well.
Because that's one of the interesting things, because one of the traditional names for those sort of bundles of firewood is a faggot, isn't it?
That's right. Indeed,
so people used to cut those and actually take them, particularly gorse, but also other smaller, it's the twiggy bits, isn't it?
Yes.
And they're bundled tight together.
Yes.
And to make your bread, it would have taken about 6 to 8, maybe 10 faggots to heat the bread oven up. And then you cook your bread in that oven.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. But also, quite often this goes for firewood as well, some species, doesn't it? And that's quite, that's the thing. It is being burnt, the carbon's being released, but it is a heating source just as much as the biomass boiler, isn't it?
It is, yes. So we have, a very big firewood industry within the UK. So we, and like you say, when you're burning it, you are releasing that carbon back into the atmosphere. But the idea is that it's a renewable source. We are then growing more trees, which are then capturing that carbon back in. So it's a cycle, rather than taking the coal out of the ground and just releasing it out into the atmosphere, where it's not being renewed.
And one of the species clearly that is a native that we've got an issue with at the moment is ash, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, because ash has all its own uses. We talked about broom handles.
Lots, very, very famous with furniture makers. Very, very sought after for furniture makers.
And we had the issue. It's quite. I don't think you remember it. The problem we had with the elm. In the countryside, and Dutch elm disease, and the loss of elm from this country.
Yes, yeah. The Dutch elm disease, wiped out, nearly all the large elms within the country. I believe the only place now where you have large elms is down in Brighton.
Yeah.
They managed to put up a cordon zone to protect the large trees that were there, so stopping the movement of wood in and out of Brighton and Hove. They managed to protect the large trees there. But yes, it wiped out nearly all the large elm trees across the country. So,
an elm was one of these trees that they used to. It was a feature in the hedgerows as well, wasn't it? It's one of the dominant trees in the hedgerows. One of these large trees you get out there, and they used to cut the boards, and that's what quite often the big barns are clad in. What they call waney edge boards. They've left the bark on even, it's quite wobbly, but those elm boards is quite often what was made up the barns, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right. And it's extremely resistant to rot as well.
Yeah.
Very good. And also used down by the sea. So a lot of your sea defences and the wooden structures that you'll see down by the sea, a lot of them were elm, because it would last in the seawater for a very long time. And so a lot of it's still there.
A lot of it's still there, but one of the issues, they're doing less of those sea defences anyway, but one tree that they used to replace that elm was tropical hardwoods, which is clearly a bigger issue, isn't it?
Indeed, yes, yeah. Chopping the trees down in across the world to bring them over here for our cedar fences is never a good thing.
Yeah, carbon footprint of that must have been, well, it wasn't a carbon footprint, it was probably on a sailing ship, wasn't it? But yeah, but nowadays the carbon footprint of those tropical hardwoods coming over here, it's probably far better. Well, it is almost certainly far better that, we use our own hardwoods, isn't it?
That's right, yeah. I mean, there's a big push, certainly in Britain. There's an organisation called Grown in Britain, which is encouraging people to use as much of the timber grown in Britain for their products. Scary fact is that we're second to China in our imports of timber, which is crazy for the size we are. We use a lot of wood. That shows how much wood we actually use within the country, and we could reduce that by growing more trees commercially, but also you can grow trees commercially, but also have wildlife thriving through them. If you manage them well and have a diverse mix of species.
And that's one of the problems at the moment is this destruction. The thing is, we talk about destruction of the tropical hardwoods and the forest and the Amazon and Borneo and places like those disappearing.
Yeah.
It's essentially what we did, a couple of millennia ago here is get rid of a lot of forests.
Build our navy and as such, yeah.
But being particularly careful about not using those, because I mean, there's some sustainable use of tropical hardwoods, and there's grown under harvested under license and things like that. Yes. But there's bound to be a mix of illegally taken stuff in that as well, isn't there?
That's right, and it's very hard to know stuff coming from that far across the world whether it has actually been cut sustainably or not. In Britain, we have a very good standard for forestry, and everybody who cuts and works commercially within the sector has to go by that standard. And we're kind of world leaders in terms of that standard. We just don't have a lot of woodlands. So
yeah. Because we talked about elm there, and that the problem with that was a certain beetle that got in. I think it was a native beetle, in fact. It wasn't an introduced beetle, was it?
No, I believe it was a native beetle and a fungus that lived on the beetle.
Yeah.
And the beetle flew at a certain height. So as soon as the tree got to a certain height, or the large trees that were already grown, the beetle would burrow into the tree, release the fungus, and then the fungus would
kill the tree. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's certain thickness of bark you need, because it doesn't go on this, because you get elm growing coppicing and getting little stems up.
That's right. Yeah.
When the bark gets to a certain thickness and the beetle can get in, then it gets in and the fungus kills it.
Yeah. So you'll still see elm today growing, but as soon as it gets to a certain height and a certain thickness of that bark, like you say, it has it, unfortunately.
But it's a slightly different thing with the ash dieback, which is clearly a big issue. You're dealing with it all the time, aren't you?
Yes. So it's a fungal disease that has come over from Asia, and over in Asia there are different species of ash trees, but they've kind of grown and have lived with this pathogen for their whole lives. Their ecosystem is grown up with it, but it comes, or the fungal spores fly through the air onto the leaves, and they go in through the pores in the leaves, and then they slowly wilt down the leaves and work their ways down the leaves into the twigs.
Yeah.
Now in Asia the leaves would drop off and the fungal spores would go down to the leaf litter, and it would be kind of that small cycle. Whereas here in England, our ash trees have never seen this disease and are not capable of coping with it. So it's slowly travelling into the twigs and in the branches, and it's tricking their immune system. They don't know that they've got something wrong with them, so they can't deal with it. They can't put up the defences that they would normally. So unfortunately, it's tearing through our countryside. We've seen it through Europe, and Denmark has seen nearly about 95% of all of their ash trees fatally gone. And we're looking probably at about the same rate, unfortunately.
Because I remember in those days when I used to use a chainsaw and things like that, quite often you had to be aware of some trees and the characteristics of them, and ash was always one that when you're cutting it, it's got certain structure and certain strengths, and which makes it good for some things.
Yes.
But it splits quite easily, doesn't it?
It does. It's very, that's why the firewood market like it. So it's good for splitting your logs. But also when you're cutting the tree down, they used to watch out for the barber chair.
Yeah.
So as you're cutting in halfway through the tree, it would then split up.
Yeah.
And snap off, which would potentially, if you have your head in the wrong place, off comes your head.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it would leave what would look like a barber's chair.
Yeah.
And they also call it the widowmaker.
Yeah.
There's a lot of,
And when a large ash now has become infected with ash dieback, and it becomes, towards being dead, basically.
Yes, yeah.
It's even more brittle, isn't it? And actually really unpredictable, somebody at the base trying to take it down. Indeed. For safety reasons.
Yes, yeah. So the ash dieback, as the name says, it's a dieback disease. So it starts in the leaves and starts to go back into the twigs, and so the branches become very brittle and start dying off. So if you're a chainsaw operator and cutting the tree, as the tree starts moving, those top branches are starting to fall and will break off, and it can be very dangerous. And we've had some nasty accidents where people have been really seriously injured.
Yeah.
So we're trying, certainly where we're taking trees out, we're trying to do it mechanically, so with machines where the operators and the contractors are protected. So
in terms of, I think, as far as I know, every single site that we've got ash on has got ash dieback.
That's right, yes.
Clearly we've got people walking on these sites. It becomes brittle and therefore can start falling down and things like that.
Indeed.
So what are we doing? We actually getting rid of all ash trees on all of our sites?
We're not, no. So what we're doing, we're reviewing all of our sites. We're looking at the high use areas that we have, and we are actively taking out the ash there where we know that there is a danger to the public. But our default position is to leave ash and leave it to rot down and break down naturally in the environment that it's in, where there's no danger to the public. So certainly out in the middle of the woods where we don't have any paths or anything like that, we're going to let the trees just break down naturally and see, because there's a lot of species, I think nearly 900 different species that rely on ash or are associated with ash. So if we were to take out all our ash, there's a problem there. There's a lot of species that are trying to lie. So we're going to let it break down. It could take 10 years, it could take 20 years for some of these trees to break down. So that's our default position, is to leave as many as we can. But saying that, we have a lot of roads, we have a lot of buildings, car parks that we just can't do that. So we are actively taking the trees out where we need to.
And there is still the hope, though, that there is some resistance in the native trees, though, isn't there?
Yes, we are hoping, and from research we've had from Denmark and Europe, that there are some trees that are fighting resistance. It's not that they're not getting the disease, but they're just more capable. Their genes are more capable of dealing with it. So that's part of the reason for leaving as much ash as we can. Is looking for those ones that might be slightly resistant. And there is lots of research going on by the Forestry Commission and other organisations to see if there are other certain genes of the ash or slightly different species that we can look at planting in the future.
Because there's a ban on planting at the moment, because if you're moving trees around, if you're taking them to a nursery, you're moving the disease around as well, aren't you? There's no point in doing that. Yeah, and actually at one of our woods at Crab Wood, just up near Winchester, recently, I think we had Kew Gardens come out again.
Right.
I think they were back here about 3-4 years ago, and they were doing certain tests on the ash trees.
Right.
And they're repeating those tests to see if there's any resistance. And it might be in one of these woodlands here, actually, we might have some resistant strains, which can then repopulate, the woodlands and farmlands with trees that are resistant, couldn't they?
Yes, that's right. So, we could have somewhere in the middle of this woodland, we might have one of those resistant trees. So we want to keep as many as we possibly can.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a lovely day. I've really enjoyed standing in the sun out here. The frost is gone now, so it's lovely and warm here. But it's been really nice getting out. It's good to meet you again, James.
Yeah, you too, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you, James. It's been really good to hear about the different types of management in our woodlands.
And it's great to get an update on the important work that you and the rest of the team are doing on ash dieback.
Yes, ash dieback's certainly going to have a huge impact on our woodland landscape, isn't it?
It definitely is. We're going to see quite a few changes in the coming years. I also never realised how much we use wood for. We use it for furniture, home decor, construction, such as cladding. And down at River Hamble Country Park, we've made our own cladding for the new building that's going up down there.
Yes, we had a patch of sweet chestnut down on site there, and it's been around for 40 years, so it needed some management. And what they did, they felled it and they turned it into slabs so they could clad the building in.
Yeah, and it looks beautiful.
Absolutely, and carbon footprint in terms of miles is virtually 0 miles.
Yeah. So, are you ready for another of Carly's fun facts, Andy?
I'm always ready, you know that, Carly.
So today, approximately 50% of the world's industrial logging goes into making paper, and that includes toilet paper. And every 10 minutes, enough toilet paper is used globally to circle the Earth.
That certainly is a lot of paper, isn't it?
Definitely is. Every 10 minutes, enough to circle the Earth. I'm definitely going to be using a little bit less toilet roll next time.
And I also think in terms of, all that junk mail we get, I might as well put a bin under my letterbox for all the actual mail I get compared to junk mail.
Yeah, and it's even worse when you think that 70 to 75% of the world don't use toilet paper. And that's either due to cost, availability, or their culture or plumbing systems. So 25% of the world's population use enough toilet roll to encompass the Earth. It's a lot of toilet paper, Andy.
It certainly is. It would require a bit of a culture change for some of us, won't it?
It would, yeah. So I hope you have all enjoyed this episode of Looking After Nature. We'd love to hear from you with any comments or thoughts, or if there's anything you'd like us to discuss in a future episode, you can let us know by checking out our social media pages.
And we'd really appreciate if you rate and review our podcast on iTunes, as this helps other people find us. For now, thanks again for listening. I'm Andy Davidson.
And I'm Carly Harrod. See you next time.